Hello there. Can you hear me? Yes, it looks like it's working. Cool. Hello, everybody. My name is Jay. I'm one of the expert OET teachers here at E2 Test Prep. If you have any questions, please pop them into the chat for me. Okay. We've got a few minutes before we kick off, but I'm happy to sit around and answer a few questions beforehand. Hello, Kath, Shamin, Maria, Nithya, Samira, Jennifer, Maria again. Nice to see you again. Do you have any questions for me before we begin? Got a few minutes. Please pop them into the chat. Hello, Sia. Nice to see you. And Mjoy and Hazel. Okay, here's a good question from Samira. Why is listening part C so difficult? I agree with you. I think listening part C is definitely the most challenging of the listening subtests because you're doing many things at once. It's not just purely listening. You're sort of listening, you're reading, you're making sure you're following along. I think one of the most challenging aspects of listening part C is making sure that you're actually on track with the audio, knowing where you're up to, basically. It seems to be easier if the audios are an interview because the interviewer seems to punctuate the interview. And so you know when you're switching between questions, you know when you're transitioning from question number 29 to 30 or whatever. What's more challenging is when it's the monologue, when it's one person speaking, and then you have to really sort of listen carefully to know when they're making a transition from one question to the next. And usually they'll drop sort of hints that they are transitioning. For example, let's say they're talking about diabetes and they'll say, okay, now that we've talked about causes from diet, let's talk about the hereditary nature of diabetes or something. So there'll be a transition and then the next question will be about that. So that's certainly one aspect that's challenging. Then the other aspect that's challenging with listening part C is, of course, you're reading while you're listening, which is impossible to do. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but try this at home tonight. Try to read something carefully and then get your partner or friend to say something to you that's important. See if you can read and listen at the same time. Turns out you can't. You cannot read and listen at the same time. You can either read or listen. So what you have to do in listening part C then is very much sort of, you have to sort of flash read. You'll flash read the question, you'll flash read the answer options, and then listen. Flash read, listen. But primarily or predominantly, you're listening to what's being said. Okay, that was a good question. Thanks for that. Appreciate a question like that. Okay, Anitha, how to write an effective purpose for the letter. Cool, that's what we're going to look at in this lesson. We're going to look at writing actually in more detail. Nimi asked about time management. I won't get started on time management yet, but cool, it's just hit 5 o'clock. So let's get started and look at what we're going to do today. So let me just hold your horses. Let me just find my right PowerPoints. Probably should have got this stuff a bit more organized earlier. And let me share my screen. Cool. And I'll start my introduction again. Hello, everybody. My name is Jay. I'm one of the expert OET teachers here at E2 Test Prep, where you can go and get some good online OET test preparation. So what we're going to do in this live stream is look at OET writing. What we're going to do specifically is I'm going to concentrate on the 5 minutes reading time and how you can maximize your scores by utilizing the 5 minutes reading time really well. Okay, we're going to look at a number of different things. I'm going to look at our structure with you as well as case note selection amongst a few other things. But what I want to do to start with is look at some data that was collected in 2018 about the average scores for nurses and doctors in the writing. This is by far the lowest, the subtest that gets the lowest scores. So nurses on average score in writing 290, doctors on average score in writing 330. So it's certainly something that you need to pay attention to if you're aiming for 350, which I believe most of you are. So it requires your attention, okay? And it's certainly not something that you should do, rock up on test day and just do the writing subtest without fully understanding what to do. Even if your English is really good, there's a certain way that you need to write these letters to maximize your scores. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to really concentrate on this model letter here, which would sort of get an almost perfect score, I imagine. You probably haven't seen these case notes before. They're from E2 Test Prep, e2language.com. But this is a high scoring model letter. I'm going to take you through what it requires to get a high score in your OET writing. More specifically, as I mentioned, we're going to look at the 5 minutes reading time. I'm going to talk to you about case note interpretation. I'm going to talk to you about case note selection and the concept of relevance. This is all happening in the 5 minutes reading time, by the way. And then I'm going to talk to you about structure, paragraphs at the structure at the paragraph level and structure at the entire letter level. Because my understanding is this: if you get this 5 minutes reading time right and you are able to interpret, select according to relevance, and think about the structure of your paragraphs, and you should be able to memorize the overall structure of your letter, then you're going to be in a really good position to spend that 40 minutes actually writing, and it will boost your scores tremendously. If you want some top quality OET preparation, check out e2language.com, by the way. We've got mock tests with feedback that include the speaking components. We've got live classes happening every day with expert teachers. We deliver fantastic writing feedback, and we've got methods lessons on there that are not on YouTube. They're just specific for the platform. So check that out if you want some good OET preparation. Okay, let's imagine you've got it's test day, you sit down, you've got 5 minutes to do your reading, okay? And here's the case notes that you're looking at. So you open up your test, you open up the case notes, and this is what you see. Just for your interest, in today's class, we're going to look at nursing case notes, a set of nursing case notes. Everything I teach you is going to be relevant for medicine or physiotherapy or whatever profession you are. I've chosen these case notes specifically because they're pretty generic. I think everyone will be able to understand what's going on in them, even regardless of your background or your profession, okay? So first thing you want to do on test day is skip all of the case notes and go straight to the writing task. That's what you want to look at carefully. And so let's read this one. It says, using the information given in the case notes, write a referral letter to Ms. Loretta Pasquale, who is a physiotherapist at Templestowe District Medical Clinic, 43 Anderson Street, Templestowe, regarding Mr. Chien's rehabilitation. Cool. So we've read that carefully. But what we want to do when we read this is we want to ask ourselves 3 questions about this particular task. Who, what, and why, okay? So who refers to the recipient of the letter? Who are we writing to? What type of letter are we writing? And why are we writing? These are the 3 critical questions that when you actually begin writing will really guide the way that you construct your letter and your paragraphs and all of the information that you put into it. So please, into the chat on YouTube there, A, B, and C, who are you writing to, what type of letter, and why? Please pop that in. While you're doing that, I'm just going to check that the live stream is hunky-dory on YouTube, so bear with me here. And it seems to be working. Let me just check the sound. Holy moly, it's all working. Cool. All right, so we're writing to Loretta Pasquale, who is a physiotherapist, and that is going to be all important, the recipient's position there, or their profession rather. What are we writing? We're writing a referral letter, which, to be perfectly honest, doesn't have that much of an influence on the way that you write or construct your letter. The difference between referral, discharge, and transfer, I think, is pretty minimal. Certainly comes down to that purpose statement. Why are we writing to Loretta Pasquale? Well, it looks like this patient requires her help for physiotherapy rehabilitation, okay? Now that we've sort of got that in mind, That's what we're thinking when we read the task. And now when we begin reading the case notes and interpreting the case notes, we're going to be putting ourselves in the shoes of the physiotherapist. That's why I have a pair of shoes there. They are Loretta Pasquale, the physiotherapist's shoes. Everything we do, everything we think about, everything we write is going to be for her, okay? And let's say she was a dermatologist, then those pair of shoes would be very different because we'd be writing everything, directing everything to the dermatologist. And I'm also going to keep that it's a referral letter and a rehabilitation in that this patient requires rehabilitation in mind. Again, when we write the letter, we're going to be thinking physio, 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 physio for the entire body of the letter, okay? So now let's interpret the case notes. We've opened up the page on test day. We've gone straight to the task. We've asked ourselves those critical questions. We've got our answers. Now we're going to go back up to the top of the case notes and we're going to begin to interpret. And when we interpret, okay, really we're doing two things. One, interpretation means you understand the case notes, okay? And you've got to be careful because some people can misinterpret, and we'll see the scoring in a second, how that can affect you. But while you're interpreting and reading the case notes, the second thing that you're going to be thinking about is relevance, okay? Because some case notes are highly relevant. Some are kind of relevant and some are simply irrelevant, okay? And you need to be thinking about this while you're simultaneously reading and interpreting the case notes. So think about a traffic light that has red, yellow, and green. Okay, green we're definitely including in a letter. Yellow, we'll think about it. Red, it's irrelevant. We don't need to. Let's just briefly touch on the scoring because I'm going to show you why this 5 minutes reading time can impact your scoring so much. You're scored in 6 ways in OET writing. You're scored for purpose, content, conciseness and clarity, and genre and style, organization and layout, and language. Purpose, you get a score from 0 to 3, and the rest of them you get scored from 0 to 7. So this is what it's all about, really. At the end of the day, you want to get a high score. This is what it's all about. Let's look at that content criterion. So this thing we're looking at here is the official, well, this is the public band descriptors for how you're scored from OET official. And to get a top score for content, which is 1 of 6, you need to do this, okay? The content of your letter is appropriate to your intended reader. That's why I've got the pair of shoes there, because everything we write is going to be for the physiotherapist. It's going to be appropriate and intended for her, okay? 2B, the content of your letter addresses what is needed to continue care. Key information is included. No important details are missing. That's why we're going to be thinking about relevance. That's why we have the traffic light with the red, yellow, and green, okay? We need to disregard unimportant things, and we definitely need to keep or put into our letter the important or relevant case notes or information. And 2C, the content of your letter accurately represents the case notes. This is about interpretation. You get a low score if you misinterpret case notes. Cool? Hopefully that all makes sense. With that in mind, let's begin reading the case notes together. We're going to go through the whole thing together, okay? And I'm not going to really tell you what you should and shouldn't include because I want you to make decisions about that and think for yourself about relevance. I'll show you at the end of this video a model letter. We'll go through it. So we've got Mr. George Chien is a 54-year-old patient in the medical ward in which you work. The hospital in which you work is St. Andrew's Hospital, and there's the address of your hospital. Here's the patient details. Name Mr. George Chien. So far you might be thinking, okay, relevant, irrelevant, semi-relevant, etc. And also keeping in mind why we're writing the letter, which is for physiotherapy rehabilitation. Second set of case notes here, or the second part of the case notes, patient details. George Chien, marital status, married, residence, Templestowe. Next of kin, Thomas, 26, lives in single, lives in Taiwan. Susan, 22, single, lives at home, a student. How do you feel about relevance here? Would you include, for example, something about the next of kin there? Is that relevant? Perhaps at this stage, we don't really know. Well, certainly by the end of this interpretation, we'll know much more about relevance, but we're starting to get a bit of an idea about what's relevant and irrelevant. Here we have an interesting part of the case notes, the admission date. So what's the date today? It's the 25th, right? So it looks like George came in on the 23rd. So George was admitted 2 days ago, and he's going to be discharged today, okay? This, I imagine, is going to be absolutely critical information to include in your letter. Let's look at his social background. So he's an accountant. Does a physio need to know that? Alcohol, 2 to 3 units socially. Is that worth mentioning? Doesn't seem that radical, does it? Non-smoker. Is that worth mentioning? He doesn't smoke? I'm not going to say anything. You think it through. Enjoys watching soccer and walking the dog. How relevant is all of that for the physiotherapist? Here's George's medical background. He has osteoarthritis. Has or had? It's difficult to say here, actually. Just says osteoarthritis. I think we can infer that he still has it. Right knee, progressive severe pain, total knee replacement, TKR, total knee replacement, on 13th of the 10th, 2021. When was that? That was like 12 days ago. Was it 12 days ago? Yes. 12 days ago, it looks like George had a knee replacement in his right knee. Again, interpretation, we want to be making sure we're understanding this. And now, or medical background, rather, severe difficulty with mobility in the right lower extremity, glandular fever in 2014, and a history of shingles. Unfortunately, in the reading time, you cannot use your pen. It would be wonderful if you could take out your pen and write something like R for relevant or IRR for irrelevant or cross them out. But during the reading time, you cannot use your pen. We're doing all of this mentally, all of this interpretation, selection, thinking about relevance is all done in your mind, but that's okay. Here we have something interesting because we have dates. And when we find dates in the case notes, we need to work out what's going on in terms of linearity of time. So here's his admission date, which was 2 days ago. And yet he had the knee replacement 10 days prior to that. So why was he admitted to hospital? Was he admitted to hospital to have the total knee replacement? Or was he admitted to hospital because it seems like there are complications with his total knee replacement? And have a look at the scoring there, 2C. I'll remind you of that. The content of your letter accurately represents the case notes. If you get this wrong, if you misinterpret this and you think that he's actually being admitted to have the knee replacement, you would certainly lose points. What's going on here with this patient, George Chien, is that he's had the knee replacement and now there are complications, okay? This is a tricky little thing that hopefully you've picked up. Admission details, post-right total knee surgery, which I guess is a little bit misleading there. Impaired mobility, self-care activities, post-operative anemia, right knee, moderate swelling fluid. That looks like something there, right knee, moderate swelling fluid. Again, keeping Loretta in mind, writing a referral letter, and George needs rehab. Medical progress, moderate anemia, discomfort of skin on his back, moderate swelling of the knee, ice pack treatment. So this is what's been happening in the hospital, in your medical ward. The incision is well healed, clean and dry, which is more information that in fact the knee replacement happened a while ago. He's had some medication, some Rixtra, was prescribed during hospitalization, discontinued just prior to discharge. Nursing management. So this is how he's being looked after. Supervised level for bed mobility, modified independent level for transfers, can ambulate or walk less than 100 meters with a front wheel walker, has a limited range of motion in his knee, he's being supervised for grooming and bathing, minimal assistance level for lower body dressing, he's eager to go home, he has prescription painkillers and thyroid support, 60 milligrams daily, and multiple supplements. Again, which of these is relevant for the physiotherapist? You'll be keeping that in mind as you're going through and interpreting, thinking about relevance. Assessments. George is medically stable, and the discharge plan is this. The patient will be discharged home with family assistance, regular diet as tolerated, needs acute comprehensive rehabilitation, and the patient has a front wheel walker. Cool. Okay, so we've gone through that. We've interpreted correctly, I believe now, which is great. And we've thought about relevance, which is good. We have an idea about what we're going to include and what we're going to exclude from our letter. And now becomes I think I wouldn't say the hardest part, probably one of the most important parts is thinking about how you actually are going to structure your letter, not in terms of the macro structure. We all know that the date goes here and the address goes here, etc. I'm thinking about what's going to go into your paragraphs and how many paragraphs are you going to include. One of the things that I've noticed as a teacher is that if a candidate gets their structure right, if the paragraphs are well structured, they're categorized well, they'll get a higher score because it just seems to flow better. They know what's happening in terms of the narrative or the story of the patient. When you understand the narrative of this or the story of the patient, you just seem to write a better flowing letter. If your paragraphs are all misconstrued and discombobulated, it's kind of problematic because that's when examiners go like, oh, I'm not sure what you're trying to say here. While I'm at it, I'm just going to do a little ad break for e2language.com. We have really good scoring videos. Lots of really clever videos, whoops, I don't have a picture of it, that are not found on YouTube, that are only found on e2language.com, that go in detail into all the scoring of the writing and speaking sections, that tell you really how to write your letter in a way that does maximize your scores. I highly recommend those videos. And if you do go to e2language.com, you can sign up for free. So let's think about structure here. Think about structure. And when we talk about structure in terms of the scoring for OET writing, we're talking about organization and layout. So that is this criterion here. This is the one that's all about structure. And if we look more closely at this particular criterion, we can see 4 sub-criteria. 5A says organization is appropriate, logical, and clear. 5B says key information is highlighted. This is not literally highlighting with a pen. What this means is that your whatever's most important is going to be most apparent in your paragraph. That means that it's either going to be towards the top of your paragraph or it's going to be preceded by a little adverb that might be like importantly, comma. So then that information's highlighted. I know that it's critical information. 5C, your subsections are well organized. That is paragraph structure. I'll talk to you in a second about that. And 5D, your letter is well laid out just generally. Okay, so you know how to do that. 5D really is a gimme point. You should be able to get that one straight away. I'm just going to check the YouTube live stream just for a second to make sure that I'm still functional and happening. Cool, it's all good. Okay, so we've opened up our case notes. We've gone to the task. We've understood who we're writing to, what type of letter, and why we're writing it. Okay, we've then gone back up to the top of the case notes and we've begun interpreting, understanding what each case note means. Simultaneously, we're thinking about relevance. Okay, now we've got to a point, we've got a couple of minutes left in our reading time, and we're going to think about structure. We're going to think about what paragraph, how many paragraphs, what are my paragraphs going to be about? This is where I'll give you my warning. And to give you my warning, I'm going to go full screen. So take me seriously. You really cannot and should not memorize a template for OET. A lot of people ask questions like, what should be the first paragraph of the letter? Should I always include the medical background information? Should I do this? Should I do that? The answer is, I don't know. The answer is it completely depends on what case notes you get on test day. The people who write these things are really intelligent. They write them in such a way that you cannot use a template. And if you do memorize a template, you're going to get a poor score. Put another way, you need to be flexible, and don't be afraid of being flexible, because being flexible means you're going to get a higher score, okay? Being flexible means that you do this part really well, where you sit and think about, okay, how am I going to structure this? What are my paragraphs going to be according to this situation, according to the task, according to these case notes? If you do that, that's what's going to get you a good score. Thank you for putting up with my warning there. Let me go back here. Okay, so we're looking like a bird's eye view thinking about paragraph structure. What I'm going to do with you now is I'm going to take you through this top scoring letter, and I'm going to talk to you about what case notes I've selected from where to create which paragraphs, okay? And how I've structured up the whole thing. First things first, right at the top, just write the date. Let's say today is the 25th. If you're taking the exam today, you'll write the 25th of October, 2021. This can be a little bit confusing because the case notes that you're practicing with will be out of date, etc. Keep in mind, the first thing you write on test day, just the date of the exam. If it's tomorrow, you'll write the 26th of the 10th. Cool. All of this information, this little part of your letter, Miss Loretta Pasquale, physiotherapist, etc., all comes from the task. Okay, you can see her name, you can see her title, you can see her profession, you can see the address of her clinic. That's it. You're doing a copy job there. This is not creative at all. You're taking words directly from the task, writing it into that little section of your letter. Please pay attention to the spelling. Don't spell the recipient's name wrong. Don't spell the address wrong in any way. If it has a capital letter, use a capital letter. Okay, this stuff is cookie cutter stuff. And again, dear Miss Pasquale or dear Mr. Smith, whatever, don't spell the name wrong. Always title, surname as well. This part here, RE : title, if they've given one, first name, last name, and age. That comes right at the top of the case notes. You'll see notes, Mr. George Chien is a 54-year-old patient in the medical ward in which you work. Again, I just copy that and put it there. So far, nothing we have written has been creative or complicated at all. It's basically copying. That's cool because that frees us up because we know how to start the letter. But now we're going to move into the body of the letter, okay? And the body of the letter starts with the purpose statement. This is where we begin to actually use our critical thinking skills and actually write. So the purpose statement. Oh, this is where I do my little plug. I'm not going to go too deeply into the purpose statement here because, as I mentioned, we've got some writing videos on E2 test prep, like this one here, that is all about how to write the purpose statement. Okay, it's a great little video. It gives it to you in about 5 minutes and you'll know how to write purpose statements from beginning to end. Let me just say that they are critical. Here's this one. This purpose statement from the top scoring letter says, Mr. Chien requires your professional assistance for his ongoing difficulties with mobility following recent surgery. Now, interestingly, just below this, all these little boxes, these are how or where, from where I have written this purpose statement. So I've used the task because Mr. Chen requires rehabilitation. Okay, that was critical because I'm thinking about who I'm writing to. I've used some information from the discharge plan part of the case notes, needs acute and comprehensive rehabilitation. I've just called it professional assistance. The admission details mentioned that he had impaired mobility and self-care activities. And here I've written the difficulties with mobility. And here the medical background, the total knee replacement from 10 or 12 days ago following recent surgery. So really what I've done there is I've sort of pulled information from each of those case notes and written a good, strong purpose statement, okay? And it might seem complicated that I've pulled it from such very different places in the case notes, but that's how you need to do it. Because once you have an idea of what's going on in those case notes, you can write up that purpose statement. Let's now look at paragraph 1. How have I written paragraph 1 and where has that information come from in the case notes? Let me just read to you paragraph 1 and then we'll look at where it's come from in the case notes. Mr. Chen was admitted to St. Andrew's Hospital 2 days ago with swelling and fluid buildup in his right knee, the result of a total knee replacement, which he underwent on the 13th of the 10th, 2021, due to osteoarthritis. The resulting pain and swelling have severely limited his mobility. Consequently, his self-care activities have been significantly compromised. Beautiful follow-up paragraph after the purpose. This is the purpose expanded. Now have a look at where I've gotten these case notes from and how I've then written it. Well, I've mentioned St. Andrew's Hospital. He was admitted to St. Andrew's Hospital. That came from right at the top. The admission date, 2 days ago. 2 days ago, that was the 23rd of October. So I didn't mention the date specifically. I just said 2 days ago. Admission details with fluid buildup in his right knee. You can see right knee, moderate swelling and fluid. And then I've mentioned as a result of a total knee replacement due to osteoarthritis, that all came from the medical background. And then what I've done is this final sentence here has come from the admission details. So this paragraph here is not, I haven't just written the medical background and paraphrased that. I've pulled certain information and case notes from different places. I've then written a lovely paragraph that is a theme. It has a theme here, okay? It's telling a story. And in order to tell this story, I've needed to pull it from different places. Let's do the same thing with paragraph 2 here. Let me read to you paragraph 2, and then we'll look at where I've gotten the case notes from. During his time in care, the swelling was successfully treated by use of ice packs and painkillers, and it was noted the incision site had healed well. His mobility was supervised and he was given the use of a front wheel walker to assist in this. He still experiences a limited range of motion, managing less than 100 meters when mobilizing with his front wheel walker. So I've gotten that information from medical progress. I've got it from the nursing management and another part of the nursing management there. Later on, if you like, you can pause this video and take a closer look at how I've actually paraphrased or changed the language from the case note into the paragraph itself. Okay, what I'm talking about here with you at the moment is structure and how you create the structures of your paragraphs. Actually writing it and taking a case note and expanding it or combining case notes is a sort of different set of skills here. Right now, I'm just getting you to wrap your head around how we come up with the paragraph structures. Paragraph 3. Mr. Chen is now medically stable and ready for discharge with the assistance of his family, who will supervise his self-care activities, including bathing, grooming, and lower body dressing. So the assessment, this is a nice place to put that. He's medically stable. Mr. Chen is now medically stable. Discharge plan. Here it says patient discharge home with family assistance. I've written ready for discharge with the assistance of his family. Okay. And the nursing management, these 2 case notes here, I've put in here as well. So I've combined case notes from assessment, discharge plan, and nursing management into a single sentence paragraph. Okay. And just keep that in mind. Your paragraphs do not need to be uniform in terms of their size. You can have a paragraph that is just a single sentence. And why would you do that? You would do that because that information is distinct and separate from the other paragraphs, but does require its own place, okay? For example, let's say Let's say there was a case note, like something very peculiar about this patient. Let's say that Mr. Chien didn't speak English and his daughter was his translator, okay? Now, this is not related to anything else. It's not related to his admission. It's not related to his discharge or anything like that. It's just a little fact, a piece of information, which is critically important, unrelated to the rest. I might write a single sentence paragraph for that particular case note, okay? Again, this is what it means to be flexible on test day and to think critically and make decisions like this about structure. We're now up to the request, which is a critical part of your letter. The request says, kindly provide acute and comprehensive rehabilitation of Mr. Chien's right knee. And that came all from a single case note in the discharge plan, which said pretty much the same thing. I've just expanded it, written it into proper English using good grammar. I did have something great to say then, but I've just forgotten it. It'll come to me. Oh, yes, I was going to say, this is a simple discharge plan. This really has one point. Sometimes you're going to have a discharge plan that's going to have several dot points, if not more. And again, if you're thinking about who you're writing to, if you're putting yourself in the shoes of the recipient, then you're going to select particular parts of the discharge plan and write it for that particular person. Finally, this bit is just memorized. If you have any queries, feel free to contact me. That's a memorized sentence. Yours sincerely is a memorized phrase. Always just write yours sincerely. That's it. And finally, you write nurse, doctor, physiotherapist, whatever. So before I move to a little Q&A, let's just think about what here comes from you actually writing on test day and thinking critically about structure and actually writing, and what part of this letter is memorized. Let me just get out my little drawing tool here. Okay, you can see my little red spotlight. This part here, memorized. You don't need to think that through. This part here, memorized. This part here, well, I shouldn't say memorized, it's not right. Copied directly from the case notes. No critical thinking involved at all. This part here, well, memorized, no critical thinking at all, just copied, okay? So that whole section there. And down here, we start from if you have any queries to this, also memorized, or copied rather, or no, that part is memorized. So then we're left with the body of the letter, and the body of the letter starts here with the purpose statement and ends here. If you have any queries, don't hesitate to contact me. This is the body of the letter, and this is what you actually do on test day and should not be memorized. This part of the letter should be between 180 to 200 words. And that's, well, today, what do we do? Today, we looked at how to interpret the case notes in the 5 minutes, how to select them by thinking about relevance. You'll notice that in that model letter, there was nothing about George being an accountant. There was nothing mentioned about him watching soccer. There was nothing mentioned that his daughter Susan lives at home and his other son lives in Taiwan. That's all irrelevant. And if we're going to write 180 to 200 words, we just want relevant case notes. So relevance is critical for your content score. And finally, for your organization layout score, that's what we talked about with regard to structure. And that's what we looked at there by looking at a paragraph and seeing where we picked certain case notes to create a paragraph to ultimately tell the recipient a story about George Chien. That's what it's all about. Cool. That brings me to the end of my presentation. It was pretty efficient, a bit more efficient than I thought. That's cool. I'll stick around for 5 minutes and answer some questions. Remember, if you want some practice tests, methods, live classes, and writing feedback, check out e2language.com. Let me now answer some of your questions on YouTube Live. Oh, I've got a question here from Shardin. Shardin said, Jay, can you tell us how the score of 42 or 83 became 350 or above? Yeah, kind of. I think so. Let me just share my screen again. Sorry. So this is how we give feedback, by the way. This is a feedback card from E2 Test Prep. So if you do get feedback from us, if you submit a writing task through our platform and our experts give you feedback, we calculate a raw score. Okay, we give a raw score based on the criteria. And then that creates an OET indicative score. Of course, we can't give official OET scores, but this sort of indicates what level of score you're going to be at. And the way we do that is you get a score for each of the criteria: purpose, content, conciseness, and clarity, etc. And if you want to see that, if I scroll down, here's the feedback from the teacher. There's the sample task. So here's how it's done, basically. Our teachers go through and give you a score for your purpose statement. Let's say you didn't do this very well. It's going to give you some feedback that you can read, etc. So we go through the criteria in detail. So I don't know how it's done in the official test, but ours probably mirrors it pretty closely, I'd say. Any more questions? Okay, great question from Cassandra. Is it possible to include the request for rehab in the purpose? Yeah, so the request sort of does get mentioned twice. In the purpose statement, it has to be mentioned briefly, okay? That first sentence you write to the physiotherapist must mention, at least briefly, what you want them to do, okay? Mr. Chen requires your assistance, or Mr. Chen requires comprehensive rehabilitation, okay? That should be mentioned in the purpose statement, the request, but then of course at the end of the letter, you need to write the request paragraph. So it's the primary thing and it's the final thing that they read. And that's just good practice, right? Because I don't know if you know this, but our memory is a primacy and recency. Can't remember what that's called, but anyway, the first thing we learn and the last thing we learn stick in our minds. The rest of it we kind of forget. So that's a good thing to do. If the letter is to go, I can't understand that, Sudha, sorry. Oh, so Esra's got a question here. I want to ask you about the layout. You wrote the occupation beside the name of the receiver. It doesn't, let me just quickly show you what that question's about. And there are little things that are actually not that important, to be perfectly honest with you. People get stuck on sort of, so up here, you can see Ms. Loretta Pasquale, comma, physiotherapist. Or you could do a line break, put it below that, doesn't matter at all, okay? You're not going to win a point or lose a point for that, okay, as long as it's included. Same thing, people sort of fret about commas. I put a comma here, I put a comma after yours sincerely. Don't put a comma, don't put a comma, doesn't matter. There are bigger fish to fry, as they say, bigger fish to fry. Case note selection, structure, grammar, that stuff's really what it's all about. Here's a good question. DJ, can we use conjunctions like moreover, however, furthermore in the letter writing? They should be only, I don't want to give you advice. I'm just going to say minimally, and if they fit nicely. Don't start sentences with moreover or however. It's actually completely unnecessary. What you're writing here needs to be concise. And by adding discourse markers like that, you're going to lose points for concision there, for being conciseness. So try to avoid it, to be perfectly honest. If you find that you need a little moreover or meanwhile or something like that, fine. But honestly, please don't put too many in there. Sudha, in the letter to a GP, all discharge plan is relevant. Just be careful. Okay, so if you have to also think, and this, you have to think about whether this patient knows the GP or not. If in the task, it says you're writing to Mr. Chien's apostrophe S GP, you're writing to his GP, then the inference would be that the doctor already knows quite a lot about this patient, and you have to make that assumption. If you're referring somebody for a patient for the first time, like here, there was no indication at all that Ms. Pasquale knows George Chien. So in that case, we need to assume that we need to include information that she may not know. Again, if the doctor knows the patient or if the physio knows the patient, then we're going to exclude some information, okay? It's just another thing to keep in mind with regard to relevance and selection. Keep those concepts in mind though, really. Relevance is a critical concept to keep in mind, and structure, of course. Here's a great question. I was just about to say, this is from SMS OAB. I don't know how to say your name. How much time should we think before starting to write the letter? Good one, right. So you get the 5 minutes. We talked about that today, what to do, okay? Then you get to use your pen for the first time. And that might be a really good opportunity to just quickly scribble down what your paragraphs are going to be about, okay? You might even highlight, put a little star next to case notes that are going to go into the second paragraph or whatever. I don't know. You might need to do this while you're practicing. Think about that. But I think that's a good idea. As I mentioned before, if you get this preparation right, you get that 5 minutes reading time right, you make a little plan, then your writing is going to be much better, because if you get the structure right, the words flow. If you get the structure wrong, it doesn't flow. Nasrullah, why do we understand you so easily? I like that. Thank you. I'm not sure. Jay, is it really difficult to get 400 above in writing after 2 months of practice? Anurud, it completely depends on your current level of English. If you've got the fundamental skills, the grammar, the vocabulary, sentence structure, etc., then no, it shouldn't. You should be able to get a 400 if you've got the fundamental skills there, because then you really are practicing these concepts of case note selection, interpretation, relevance, structure, etc. What I do recommend though is getting feedback from an expert, not just anybody, getting feedback from an expert. And the reason I recommend that is you may be making silly mistakes that you're unaware of. And it's not until an expert gives you feedback, you go, oh my God, I can't believe I was doing that. Okay, so it can really save you. Okay, and here's exactly what I don't want you to do. Sorry, Rita, I'm going to make an example of you here. Do we make 3 paragraphs for each discharge letter in this way? Number 1, Mr. X was admitted to hospital with this. 2, during hospitalization. 3, discharge plan. No. As I've just shown you, to write a top scoring letter, the case notes are going to come from different parts of the letter, okay? Because what you're ultimately doing is writing a story for the recipient. And that story needs to make sense, needs to be a narrative. In order to make a flowing narrative, we're picking case notes from different places, putting them into well-structured paragraphs, etc. It does take a little bit of practice. If it was so easy that you could just memorize, okay, I'm going to write this paragraph, this paragraph, this paragraph, that's not how this test works. Trust me, this is not how the test works. SJ Bin, just use yours sincerely. That's fine. Manasa, is it necessary to include hospital name? Well, I think so. I mean, I put it in, it was 2 words. I can't remember the name of the hospital. 3 words, St. Andrew's Hospital. I put that in. I said, Mr. Chen was admitted to St. Andrew's Hospital on this date. Cool. Done. So that makes sense. Okay. So we've got a question here about conciseness and how many sentences we should write. Again, there's no real magic number for number of sentences, but it's more about what does conciseness mean. And conciseness means that you're able to give lots of information or lots of meaning with very few words, okay? If you've been preparing for IELTS, you'll know that in IELTS you have to use a lot of complex sentences, different sentence structures, varied vocabulary, etc. This test is very different to IELTS in that it's not about using flowery vocabulary and really showing off your grammatical ability, etc. This is kind of cool. This is about being as efficient as possible with your language. Okay, so if you are making that switch from IELTS to this test, really think about that too. Lorado needs help with structuring the purpose. I highly recommend the methods lesson on E2 test prep. I go into that in detail. One question from DJ, is complex sentences better marked than simple? If you need a complex sentence, you use a complex sentence. If you need to write a short, simple sentence, you write a simple sentence. So again, it doesn't really work like that, unfortunately. Here's a great question. How do we merge relevant information? That's the question. And that's really, in terms of structure, that's what it's all about. So you're going to make this particular paragraph. To make this particular paragraph, which is going to be thematic. It's going to be about something. It's going to tell that story. That means I need to pull this case note, and this case note to put it into that paragraph. That's the thing that requires practice. And I think, my good friends, I'm going to finish up there and leave it with you to do some practice and hopefully put into practice what I've taught you in this one and to think a little bit more critically about structure, okay? I think this video is going to stay up here on YouTube. What I do recommend you do is, if you are watching this on YouTube, you can check out our YouTube channel as well. Type in E2 IELTS. You'll see our videos there. You may want to subscribe to those as well. Cool. Anyway, that was fun. I will see you again soon, by the way. I'm doing another one of these. Let me tell you the date. I'm doing another one of these coming up soon. I'm doing one on speaking on the 22nd of November. So yeah, cool. All right, I will leave it there. Thanks very much for watching. My name is Jay. I will see